So today we're going to start with a quick overview of the LDL and Collections as Data project. Then I am going to pass it off to Isabel Haynes. She's going to give us a brief talk about a project she's been working on, a sonic map of New Orleans, where she's been mapping temporally and geographically some of our digital audio collections. Very cool. Then we're going to hear from Molly Mitchell. She is on the project team for Freedom on the Move. She's also a professor of history at UNO. And we'll wrap up with discussion, announcements, any questions you might have. If you have questions for Molly or Isabel, feel free to drop them in the chat or hold them for the end, but we should have plenty of time for that. This Brown Bag series is part of the LDL as Data project. Our LDL as Data project is funded by and part of a larger project called Collections as Data, which is an effort made possible by the Mellon Foundation. And what do we mean when we talk about collections as data? We're talking about using our digital cultural heritage collections, things like digitized letters, maps, photos, etc., in computational analysis, such as text analysis, digital mapping, like we'll be talking about today, and more. We're part of a 6-team cohort charged with creating examples of how to implement and use digital cultural heritage materials as data, and this fellowship is part of that work. Our grant project was titled "In 25 of Our Closest Friends, the LDL as Community-Focused Data." And the idea was to explore what it would look like to offer all contents of the LDL as data. So we took on 2 tracks, the technology track and the community track. On the technology side, we considered LDL deliverables like bulk download, machine readable rights statements, proper restriction rules. And then on the community side, we asked, is this something all 30+ LDL participants want? We're composed of over 30 contributing institutions, and voices from all of those institutions matter. We asked, is this something that is appropriate for all collections within the LDL? Some contain culturally sensitive subject matter and should be handled with particular care. And along that same line, we considered the ethical implications as well as the potential of collections as data at the LDL level. So this fellowship is a merger of those 2 tracks, the technology side and the community side. Our fellows, like Isabel, have created LDL as data use cases for future researchers, teachers, and students. So they're providing ways that the LDL data can be used alongside digital tools. And they're doing this in part to guide and inspire our community of users and contributors. Our final Brown Bag talk for this semester will be December 7th. We'll hear from Victoria Elmwood, who will present her project, The Body Web, Mapping Primary Digital Resources for the Study of Sex Work in New Orleans. And we will also hear from our special guest, Kate Schuster from the Hard History Project. But today we're hearing from Isabel Haynes. Isabel is a senior majoring in English and math at Tulane. She was also an intern, I don't know if she still is, maybe she'll tell us, with the Library of Congress's Young Readers Center, where she recorded, analyzed, and visualized collections data. And we will hear from Molly Neal Mitchell. She's the, I don't know if this title is still correct, Ethel and Herman L. Midlow Endowed Professor of History at UNO, the director of the Midlow Center for New Orleans Studies, and a Freedom on the Move project team member. So now I'm going to pass it off to Isabel to start. I think you can take over screen sharing.
All righty. Hi, everybody. My name is Isabel, and I'm going to be chatting with you guys today about my project, A Sonic Map of New Orleans. Can everybody see my screen? Are we all good?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. So like Leah said, I am a senior at Tulane University, and I'm studying math and English. For a couple years now, I've been really interested about librarianship as a career profession. I, like many people, grew up really benefiting from my public library in my hometown and just adoring my children's librarian and school librarians. And I think as I've gotten older, I've really come to appreciate the profession even more and have been inspired to look into that as a career path. So I'm really grateful for opportunities like this to kind of explore what that might look like. And prior to this, I was an intern with the Library of Congress, which was amazing. And before that, I was working at Tulane University's Middle American Research Institute Library. So yeah, that's just a little bit about my background. I'm also really interested in subjects like STEM history, math history, queer history, and culinary history. So there's a lot of history happening too. But moving right along, I'm going to chat with y'all today about this project I've been working on, which I am calling a sonic map of New Orleans. Okay, so before I really show you what the map is looking like right now, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I built it and my inspirations for it. Kind of the germ of this project was this really, truly amazing book called Unfathomable City by Rebecca Snedeker and Rebecca Solnit. And it was this anthology collection that those two really amazing authors edited, pairing essays about life in New Orleans with very intriguing, beautiful maps. You can see one on the right here. And I read that book probably sophomore year of college and was so stunned and amazed and hadn't thought about maps as a modern thing in that way, and really wanted to explore cartography as its own subject, which is very fascinating and dense. So this book has been really important to this project. But kind of the other major seed for this is a collection, an amazing collection in the LDL called Sounds of Louisiana. And I kind of haphazardly stumbled upon this collection when I was just starting this project. And I was kind of instantly captivated. It's a pretty small collection. There's only about 15 items. And it's not rooted in a specific historical moment or theme in the way that other collections more explicitly are, which is not to downplay its significance, which I'll get to in a minute. But I was very charmed, by this collection. It was kind of these short audio recordings of just everyday life, everyday sounds. And the one that really stuck out to me was a rain recording, the sound of rain on a tin roof, that someone had recorded over in Bogalusa. I think I'm saying that right. But yeah, it was just the most percussive, beautiful rain sound, the rain sound to end all rain sounds. And so I was instantly hooked and I had to know more about this collection. So as you can see here on this slide, Sounds of Louisiana was this project where students and local artists and faculty at Tulane University just kind of collected sounds that weren't necessarily something that you might think of as historically significant or especially important for archiving, the sound of a streetcar, running down the tracks, or rain on a tin roof, or bird sounds, these sounds that we hear every day. And they were compiling these sounds with the intent of kind of having this auditory history related to place, very specifically related to place, but also having kind of a general bank of sounds that people could use in other projects. And so I felt such compassion for these people. I felt such endearment to them for thinking of this cool idea and just executing it so well and coming up with so many sounds. So that's kind of how I started to think about what I wanted my LDL project to look like. I'd known I wanted to do something with sounds and particularly oral histories, which I'll get to in a minute, but this collection in particular was really important to me in kind of developing that idea of a map that, would kind of chart time and chart sound, and feature sounds that are really inherently tied to place. So yeah, Sounds of Louisiana, check it out. It is like tons of fun. So with that in mind, it kind of became easier for me to like think about what I wanted the project to look like. I started looking at audio recordings in the LDL and kind of came up with three pretty arbitrary parameters, but they helped me nevertheless. So there's sound recordings, which are things like industrial noise, animal noises, sounds from the natural world. So like wind or like the gurgling of a stream. And then also minor human noises like background chatter that you can't really decipher, but that is there and present, or like a muffled pop song, coming out over the radio, stuff like that. So that's what I counted as sound recordings. Then there were conversational recordings, which include anything that's not like sung necessarily or performed, but still it's like humans talking. So like oral histories, talk shows, interviews, radio broadcasts. And then the final category was musical recordings. And I included vocal and instrumental music recordings. So since I wanted this map to focus on New Orleans, I had to be very selective as I was kind of working through the collections. And by the way, I didn't really have like a method for that. I just kind of would search and browse different collections. And it was really like treasure hunting, kind of just looking for these audio recordings that both captured a really unique sound or people talking about sound in a really compelling way. But also were tied to New Orleans in a very like inextricable way. So that turned out to be like the most time consuming part of the project, being just kind of sifting through these collections and finding something and like listening to it and kind of picking out the different sounds, if it was like a music recording or a sound recording. And then if it was a conversational recording, listening to, the entire interview, the entire like broadcast, and kind of thinking to myself, like, is this, are they talking about music? Are they talking about sound in a way that is, relevant to this, this larger project that I'm trying to do here? And ultimately, there's so many cool music recordings in the LDL, so many. It was hard to really, narrow them down, but I ended up going with artists who either like spent a significant amount of their time in New Orleans or were born in New Orleans. So unfortunately, there were a lot of really neat recordings that I didn't include, especially in the jazz collection, that just did not necessarily have the tie to New Orleans that I was looking for, other than that genre, which is, obviously a very significant tie. But yeah, it was just like a lot of kind of listening and trying to pick up on all the different sounds that I possibly could. And I am a math major, and if we're good for anything, we're good for spreadsheets. So I had like a big old spreadsheet with all of my kind of variables in there. So when was this recorded? Where approximately was this recorded? What are the key sounds? Kind of configuring sounds as keywords almost, stuff like that. Who are the contributors? Keeping track of all of these moving pieces in a big old Excel sheet. And that kind of brings me to the next thing, which is sound madness. Definitely the most fun part of this project was finding ways to categorize sounds that, it's not necessarily like implicit what they are or like what words to use for them. So like if you're listening to music and there's a trumpet sound, that's pretty easy. Okay. Like I would listen to a musical recording and go, there's a trumpet, I'm going to write down trumpet. And often this was listed in the item information. But sometimes, especially with the Sounds of Louisiana collection, there would be all of these sounds layered on top of each other. And that's where really that kind of like deeper listening came in with like the heavy duty headphones and you know, going through it a couple times to make sure that I had like picked out all the sounds. And this was, yeah, definitely my favorite part because I got to kind of think of amazing words and get out my thesaurus, you know, like an English major to kind of identify what these noises were, you know, like breathing, gurgling, the gurgling of a stream, just noises, background noises of frustration. Someone going like, you know, brief conversations happening between strangers that are like not quite audible, vague industrial humming. So there was a lot of joy about in this part of the project. It was really fun. Yeah. So I'm not quite done putting this all together. I have a couple steps to work on. I have a couple more data points to add for the oral history, interview, and broadcast quotes. I would like to add significant quotes since most of those recordings are pretty long. They're like, some of them are over like 30 minutes. And, you know, there's definitely like a couple key quotes in there about music or sound that I'd like to add into the data points. And I also would love to embed this map in a story map that provides, you know, some minor historical context and then also gives information about the represented collections from the LDL because they're very cool. And yeah, and I'm still kind of trying to work on like the timeline aspect, like how to represent time through these like different sound recordings. But with that, I am going to hop on over to the map over here in ArcGIS. So this is what it looks like. You can see that there's three kind of different colors that I've used. Over here in the legend, those you can see which kind of categories of sound those like correspond to, but when you click on them, you see, you know, this is the title, you know, of the item, which is Streetcar. It's from the Sounds of Louisiana collection. And then here's kind of all the noises that you can hear, or the, you know, the relevant noises. So like streetcar rattling, streetcar humming, car noises. When it was recorded, where, gotta add that in, and then latitude and longitude. And then if you click more info, you can get over to the actual streetcar recording. I'm sure this is going to sound horribly garbled, but yeah, you get the idea. Yeah, so that is my project. I'm going to stop sharing, and I think we're holding questions to the end, right, Leah? Or like, I don't know.
Yes, that is right. I highly enjoyed that, Isabel, and it has me thinking about, I don't know, the ways in which maybe we prioritize the visual and the textual over the auditory and in digital collections sometimes. And I have some thoughts about that I would like to get to at the end, and I hope that other people do too. But now I will pass it off to Molly.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you. I know I was just saying to Leah earlier, I think librarians are a lot better at talking and using the computer at the same time. I've never really mastered that despite 2 years of Zoom. So bear with me. I'm gonna do my best to get through this demonstration, somewhat of a demonstration, somewhat of a presentation. So let me share my screen. So I'm going to talk about freedom on the move, and I'm mostly going to focus, I'm going to give you sort of an overview of the project if you're not familiar with it, and then try to introduce some topics related to the community / ethical side that you mentioned in your introduction, Leah, that we have been working through, but of course we have no, you know, true resolution for anything yet, but we're trying to find our way to this sort of ethic of care all the way through the project, and it's always a challenge. But yeah, let me just give you a little introduction, and then we can talk about those. Usually my colleague at University of Kentucky, Vanessa Holden, joins me on this presentation. We have we do it as a duo. And so she's not here. I'm sorry, she couldn't be here. She has to teach her class. But I will do my best to cover for both of us. And so I'm going to talk about why these fugitive slave advertisements that you see in Freedom on the Move are such rich sources. And then I'm going to talk about some of the methodological and ethical questions that arise from using them. And then show you the database and talk about how we've tried to resolve some of these issues as a crowdsourced digital database that is both public facing from its orientation and for scholars and genealogists. And we have a large number of stakeholders, or at least we believe we do. And so that with all of those stakeholders, it's especially important to try to grapple with these ethical issues, and also a K-12 constituency that's growing. You'll hear from Kate Schuster next week, who works closely with me all the time on Freedom on the Move. So I won't go into that too much, but that's also another point of ethical care that you have to take. And I also thought I was going to be able to show you the new search engine, but it is migrating as we speak onto the site. So I will have to be content with showing you the old search engine. But I think the issues that we're going to discuss, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. I could tell you what's coming Friday, I think, which is tomorrow. I guess that's why I can't show it to you today. But and then I'm going to sort of walk you through what a contributor sees in terms of transcribing, collecting metadata, and then hopefully answer questions. So truancy and, so I want to go back a little bit. Truancy and fugitivism and resistance are at the center of these advertisements that were published in newspapers from the colonial period all the way through the Civil War. We are focused on North America for the time being, although there are plenty of collections out there for Latin America and the Caribbean. And one day, when we've expanded our empire, we will be able to hopefully incorporate things beyond North America. But that's really our focus right now, is gathering ads for North America. So fugitivism was one of the most common forms of resistance. And some people that appear in the ads would have been outliers or truants, meaning they were just escaping for short periods, only planning to return later. Some become maroons, and there are certainly maroon colonies, not as large as those in the Caribbean, but as Sylviane Diouf has shown, there were colonies around Louisiana, certainly, and around New Orleans. And then others, particularly the ones perhaps that are most familiar in terms of sort of myth and popular culture and reality, are those who ran away once northern states abolished slavery and they're running to free territory. Now, when I work with my students here at UNO, we're generally focused on Louisiana and South Louisiana at that. That's a completely different migratory pattern, but we could talk about that. But on the whole, particularly when we work with students in Louisiana, K through 20, a lot of that work is sort of dismantling their idea of what a fugitive slave, what a fugitive, a self-liberating person's path might have looked like, right? That it's not the path they might have heard about in grammar school, for instance. And then certainly another aspect of fugitivism, which I can't seem to get out of my mouth today, is the existence of slave patrols. So they're sort of extant throughout from colonial all the way through 19th century chattel slavery to police people who are not where they're supposed to be, right? Outside of working hours, perhaps. And so there's this militarization that began very early in terms of retrieving people who have escaped either briefly or permanently. So it's in that context that we think about, and what that's one of the contexts in which we think about these ads. And certainly patrols don't catch everyone. So this is just our effort to kind of address briefly sort of the image that most people bring to the notion of self-liberating people. There are very famous people like Frederick Douglass, certainly the Crafts, Harriet Jacobs, and that's because they're well known for many reasons, but often because they also wrote a narrative and made it to free territory and become part of the abolitionist movement. So this is one sort of familiar image that people might bring to ads of self-liberating people that ran in the newspaper. There's Sojourner Truth, not to be forgotten. And certainly we have familiar narratives like Uncle Tom's Cabin. Here you see a visual of Eliza's escape to free territory across the river. Underground, which is maybe familiar to people as a television show. But school children generally learn about the Underground Railroad, and they learn about flights to Canada and flights to free territory. And a lot of those stories, some of which of course are true, also include Quakers, they include benevolent networks of abolitionists, and it makes, the notion that people who run away make it to freedom, right, is more predominant than not. And so the thousands of ads that we have are often not that at all, particularly if you're looking at it from the perspective of Louisiana, but really any of the ads that you see. So gotten ahead of myself. I've remembered more than I thought. So the point I want to make, which is relevant, I think, to the issues that this group wants to engage with, is the oppressive power inherent in these documents. And that power certainly existed at creation, and it's built into the ads themselves as artifacts. And it's also still present in ways that we have to address as well, particularly in terms of how we're enlisting public support now to transcribe and to collect metadata from these ads. So I guess I would say, after years of experience working on this project, these artifacts, these advertisements are deceptively economical and concise. And in fact, the issues around them and the ways in which we use them and we talk about them are really intricate and need to be carefully thought through. So when they are created, so I'm most familiar with the 19th century, so I'm just going to refer to the 19th century. With the 19th century, the ads enlisted the broader community in the project of enslavement, right? They're enlisting readers and anyone who might otherwise come across the advertisements in the process of surveilling, inspecting, policing the movements of people of color, free and enslaved, right? So of course, certainly one of the themes you often see in these ads is that an enslaver or a jailer, which I'll talk about in a second, suspect that the person might be trying to pass as free, right? That's always a, so these ads, because of the work that they do as pieces of surveillance, implicate free and enslaved people of African descent. Another issue with these advertisements that Sharon Block has talked a lot about in her study of 18th century is that they solidified racial tropes. They sort of embody difference, building on sort of understanding people's complexion, phenotype, racial categories, because there's a lot of different terms for racial categories that get used in these ads, and those vary according to region, but they are nonetheless present in every region. So that's another way in which we have to sort of be careful about the work that these ads were doing, and then the work that we are going to do with these ads. So they served structures of power. They reinforced discourses about race, criminality, the notion that African Americans were generally always subject to enslavement or eligible for enslavement, whereas whites were not. And then they invite white people and free people generally to participate in this sort of social violence and physical violence, looking at people with suspicion, offering rewards for their recovery or their imprisonment. So there's two kinds of advertisements. There are ads posted by enslavers and ads posted by jailers. And again, most of my experience working with these advertisements is rooted in New Orleans and in Louisiana, and there are very active jailers, both in the city, in St. James Parish, for instance, constantly posting ads for people who have been apprehended. So let me just sort of outline the difference between the two. So the individual enslavers ads, which I believe this is one, because Vanessa put these in here, I'm not entirely sure. But the individual enslaver ads were meant to describe enslaved people and provide relevant information about where they might be going, what they were wearing, scars, distinguishing features. They would also include a lot of personal information, depending on the situation. Histories of sale, sometimes going back 2 and 3 sales, because any site mentioned in that ad related to previous sales was a potential site where a self-liberating person might be found. So histories of sale, skills, linguistic ability, personality, other kinds of behavior, self-presentation, all of these things are contained, and they can appear in either an enslaver ad or a jailer ad, but of course it makes more sense that enslavers would have a longer experience with someone and describing them and their history, and often have more detail in them. And then you have jailer ads. And to me, I often, when I present these to students, I propose the idea that these are actually 2 different kinds of sources on one level, because enslavers are putting the ad in, or an agent of an enslaver will be putting an ad in a newspaper, like the one on the left. And jailers are reliant on other kinds of context in order to advertise someone, so that they may have apprehended someone they suspect of being a fugitive. That person then must supply the information about who claims them, who pretends to own them, right? Or where they've come from, where they've, when they were last sold, anything like that. There is, in theory, more of the voice of the enslaved person in a jailer ad than in an enslaver ad. So they are kind of different that way. It's not really easy to pin down, and we don't separate them out in the database in the crowdsourcing element of the project. But those are the 2 kinds of ads that are in there, and students and collections that we incorporate, they all include both kinds. Okay. And I'm happy to answer any questions about these different things. So this is really what probably you're interested in hearing about. So this project, while we recognize how critical it is to pull all of these sources together so that they can be searched across fields, across state lines. That has not really been done before. So there are certainly regional collections that you may be familiar with that are online and available, but they are usually oriented towards a particular state, like Virginia or Maryland. So we realize the importance of pulling these all together. Now we have the technology to do this, but then it raises these ethical concerns because we're both interested in individual stories and we're interested in aggregate information that we can glean from them, right? So that's where you run into this issue of reducing humans to data points. Also, it's challenging not to reify racial categories as you're asking people to help you cull information from the ads. How do you do that? And what is the most accurate and humanizing way to do that? And then, of course, inflicting the same discursive violence that the ads originally inflicted on Black subjects. So these sources are not easy, and yet they have so much richness within them. And so we are constantly struggling with these points, but we've tried in ways that we know how to keep these things in mind as we move through the project. We don't own these sources. We try to make Freedom on the Move inclusive, free, accessible, legible to multiple publics so that they are not leaving any stakeholders out. We try to have as much collaboration as possible and community buy-in when we work with communities directly. And as you'll hear more about from Kate next week, she'll talk about other projects as well, but she's been working very closely with us at Freedom on the Move to adopt some of the principles that she helped develop at Teaching Tolerance to find ways to make these stories available to K-12 classrooms. And that is a challenge in itself, but I'm happy to talk about. We've also created an ArcGIS story map, which is also not live yet. It was part of a grant that we're just wrapping up. But within that, we've started to develop a statement that I'm sure will be evolving as well, that indicates our recognition about these sources and the ethical concerns of using these sources, being aware of the points that I just raised in terms of the potential for dehumanizing freedom seekers, and really a recognition that is public facing, that we realize that these sources need to be handled with care. And this will make its way, it will be part of the story map and make its way into the project generally. And these are just examples of what my students have used to spatialize some of the ads in New Orleans. I'm not going to go into all that. My students made a story map along with me, mapping some of the ads in New Orleans. And let me see if I can share. I guess I should stop sharing. I'm going to show you the database itself. Okay, can everybody see that? See the ad? So if you're not familiar with the website, I'm afraid to back up because I wanted to start with this ad. I can show you the main page, but it's essentially freedomonthemove.org. And we offer people a lot of different ways to participate. They can search ads, they can help us collect metadata, and within that, they can either help us proofread ads that other people have already transcribed and collected metadata for, or they can, if they want to start from scratch and do one that hasn't been transcribed yet, they can do that. But I just sort of wanted to walk you kind of quickly through this. I'm not going to, I'm one of 2 contributors to this ad, and I'm just going to sort of go through the steps. We have a tutorial at the beginning that is, you know, pretty straightforward in terms of how things should be transcribed and corrected and answered. We are hoping to make that into a video that will make it more accessible to people, particularly students who don't want to take the time to read a slide, you know, text on a slide. Okay, so mostly when people decide they want to join us with helping us crowdsource or proofreading, maybe they're interested in ads for Louisiana. I put in that I wanted to call up an ad from Louisiana, so I just chose this. Was rather short. Ran away from the U.S. bakery to 211 Julia Street. Mulatto boy John, age 40 years, has 6 feet 2 inches length, speaks English and French, wears whiskers, has a low tone when speaking, never looks at the person he is speaking to, and has been a bread driver for the last 3 years. That's a very New Orleans ad. We have a student here at UNO who has just finished a master's thesis on sort of the history of bakeries in New Orleans, and she has a whole component on enslaved people who are working in bakeries, which is really interesting. So this is what I want to explain, is how we developed the data collection part of the project. So the ad appears, it is or is not available as a transcription already. And then you begin answering questions that create the metadata. So in what language was the ad printed? English. Was the ad posted by the enslaver, jailer, or someone else? In this particular case, it's not clear. So these are the sorts of categories that we've had to develop over time, and we hope that they are satisfactory in terms of helping us collect the appropriate metadata. It's a relational database, and I will not try to explain to you what that is, because you probably all know what that is. But if you don't, we should have our technical team come and explain it to you. But we think of things in terms of runaway events rather than a single runaway. Does the ad mention people who may have aided the runaways? No. Full name, does it specify multiple names? So we had to build in places in case often there are multiple names, has run before, claims to be free, add another runaway. Physical characteristics. Based on the ad, you think the runaway was male or female. We do have some non-binary people that pop up in these ads as well. So we tried to make room for that as much as we could while keeping this user-friendly. Age, height, weight. This is one of the questions that really demonstrates the challenges, right? What racial category is assigned to the runaway in the ad, as opposed to what racial category is belongs to the person in the ad, right? So that's the best illustration that I can give you of writing and rewriting the questions so that they're both not reifying the racial categories, but allowing us to collect the information that we need to create the database, etc. And then I encourage everybody to go through and do at least one ad or more if you want, so that you get a sense of the process, because I'm not going to go through, but that you get the idea. We've tried to create fields for any possessions, other physical descriptions, injuries, scars, languages that they may speak, reading or writing, locations. So this will be a little bit sharper relief when the new search engine appears. Each ad will have a geolocation map with it. But this is not so much true here, but in many ads, there are multiple locations. And so we had to create options for what kind of location it was. So ran away from, spotted at, caught in, jailed in, place of origin, if captured, return to, stolen from. And so that will help people who are interested in spatializing and mapping be much better able to do that. Rewards. And then enslaver comes last. And there's no denying that this information is very important if you're trying, particularly for genealogists and people who are trying to track people over time. We have to collect as much information as we can about enslavers as well. So I will stop sharing that now. And yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about the Freedom on the Move project, database, development, etc.
Thank you so much, Molly. That was amazing. There already are a couple of questions in the chat. The first one, apologies if I misheard, but did you say non-binary people are represented in the ads? If so, can you speak to how that description looks and what the ad writer says about the person?
Yes, so there are individuals who are described as often dressing as another gender, for instance, I wish I had the exact language at my fingertips, but I don't. But I could. There's one in particular named Brazil that you might be able to search for and find quickly. But certainly, we left that category open because the self-presentation, as described by the enslaver, indicates that there was some gender fluidity. In very modern terms, that's what it comes across as, but in very simple terms, it might be someone often dresses as a man, or that sort of thing. And so we wanted to leave that category available. Again, just like the racial categories, not reifying categories for people unless they are, part of the data that needs to be collected. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that's helpful.
We have a museum kiosk that we've also made from a recent grant that's not live yet because we haven't been able to test it anywhere. But we also left the non-binary in there as well because we felt like that was sort of important if we're trying to reach visitors and get them interested in the project, making sure that all of these categories are you can explore those a little bit through the ads.
Thank you. Another question, are there ads from free people of color searching for their relatives?
Not in this format that I've seen. No, I haven't seen. So you're asking if they're looking for their enslaved relative who might have run away that belonged to someone else or belonged to the free person of color? I suppose that's a possibility. But I have not come across anything like that so far. That's not to say that it doesn't exist. But they're enslaved relatives, yeah. So it's possible. I just haven't seen that. But one thing I kind of glossed over in the presentation, which Vanessa makes a point about, is that a lot of this depends on very personal relationships, and whether or not someone is advertised in the newspaper, it depends on the relationship they had to their enslaver. There was a considerable amount of mobility, particularly again, if you're looking at an urban situation. Maybe it's someone has to be missing for several days, or the enslaver somehow is pretty convinced the person's not coming back, but then they decide to advertise because there was a certain level of give and take. Vanessa has seen this in Virginia ads as well, particularly in 17th, 18th century. There's this sort of expectation that people might disappear for a day or two, but they'll come back. And so you don't necessarily place an ad for that. But if you're convinced that this person is, a lot of the ads that my students have helped me pull together for New Orleans, they're often people, I call them lurking but working. Lurking is a term that often appears in these ads. They're lurking about in the second municipality. They're lurking about in the back of town, but they're often working or suspected of working. And so they're trying to maybe work for themselves for a while and then may go back. So these personal relationships are embedded in these ads, whether you're talking about family separation, which is another really important theme. And it's something that especially younger children always zero in on when you read an ad about someone who was recently sold from Virginia in New Orleans, for instance. Then that indicates a lot of family separation across long distances, but also the personal relationships with enslavers and people around town. Somebody might be very familiar to you because he's so-and-so's coachman. And so that not only implicates the community in trying to find him, but expect that the community already knows him or her.
Mm-hmm. I had a question for Isabel, if you were still able to unmute. Isabel had mentioned sort of being drawn in by these collections with sort of an emotional connection to them. You talk about being charmed and endeared, and there's almost a sense of like nostalgia with the rain sounds. And I was wondering if you could say anything more about that appeal, and maybe even give us an idea of how to sort of draw other researchers in with that sort of emotional affective connection.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. I don't know if this is how everyone, I think that like with digital exhibits, particularly, like I've spent a lot of time on like, kind of websites like the LDL, and I'm sure that, you all have too. And it's like, it's not like a library in that like, you're walking around and like, there's stuff that grabs your attention in the way that like at like the spine of a book would, or like at a museum, so I guess what I'm trying to say is that like, for me, with how I kind of am on the internet, like I don't always enjoy like browsing digital collections in the way it's not as fun for me. It's not as much of a treasure hunt, but what I think what really I loved about Sounds of Louisiana was, just that there were this group of people who were just like, this sound that is so normal and so like accessible to everyone already, like I want to put a frame around it, or like, I don't know if that's, I don't know these people, so I don't know if that's what they were thinking, but I was so like, like listening to that rain sound and like the bird sounds, I was so like entranced. And like, I don't know, I think I'm kind of a hippie, so like I, like the rain sound really does get to me, but like I thought it was like the nicest, sweetest idea. And there's this one, if you guys have a chance to look at it, I'd really recommend listening to this one. It's about like 10 minutes, but it's a guy just like walking down the street, and like it's got like a lot of good like mankind noises, like hamburger sizzling, like that really good sizzle sound, like a lot of like background chatter, like a lot of like what's ups, stuff like that. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but I think that like there are sometimes like, especially like in collections where there's like a lot of documents or like stuff that doesn't like necessarily appeal to pathos, I guess. I don't know, like in a super direct way, like it is nice to have like a couple ones where like it's like, no, let's just like listen to some birds, and that's also in its own way like really an important thing.
Yeah, you said like put a frame around it, but it has me thinking about the difference between an audio collection and a visual collection, and that when you play that audio, it does sort of fill the room. It is particularly immersive in a way that maybe a photograph of that rain on the tin roof or that man walking down the street is sort of like, is more trapped in a square. So it's interesting.
For sure. Yeah. And I think that like, I don't know, like I think that there are some images in the Sounds of Louisiana collection that accompany the the recordings, but I kind of prefer it without. Like, I mean, the visual is definitely nice, but it is kind of cool to like use like, I don't know, like that kind of deeper listening to like get through all the layers of like you know, especially like in the ones that are more dense, like it's a nature scene where there's like lots of different insects buzzing from different like distances away from you. And like there's like water sounds that are like different distance away from you. Like
yeah.
that kind of, it's like almost like meditating because you're just sort of hanging out with this sound and you can't really look anywhere. You just have to listen. So I don't know. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for that perspective. And we are coming to the end of our hour. I want to thank Molly and Isabel again so much for participating with us. I found this extremely enlightening. I want to take a quick moment to plug the Journal of Critical Digital Librarianship. We are welcoming submissions across a range of topics that apply a critical framework to cultural heritage, digital librarianship, and digital collections. Either of today's projects could turn into potential great papers for the Journal of Critical Digital Librarianship. So reach out to us if you've got ideas or submissions. We are accepting submissions on an ongoing basis. Again, thank you all so much. This recording will be available in a few days, and have a good afternoon.